There are events in history that defy logic and human understanding. One such event occurred in 1968, and its narrative is so inexplicable that it continues to intrigue and disturb those who learn of it. This is the story of the mysterious disappearance of a couple during a flight over the skies of the United States, an event that, over the decades, has unfolded into a series of equally inexplicable phenomena, creating one of the greatest enigmas in aviation history. It was a seemingly ordinary afternoon when Puerto Airlines Flight 228 took off from the small airport of Kankakee, Illinois, bound for Dallas, Texas. On board were 30 passengers, including Gerald Potter and his wife, Kerry. The couple, who had arrived at the airport a little late, were greeted by the crew without incident, despite the tense and weary expressions they both wore. Perhaps it was just the effects of a rushed trip, thought the attendants, but no one could have predicted what was about to happen. The aircraft, a Douglas DC-3, began its smooth ascent, slicing through the white clouds that dotted the blue sky. Inside the plane, passengers settled into their seats, some immersed in their readings, others simply relaxing and enjoying the start of the journey. Among them, the Potters sat in silence, exchanging only a few words as they gazed out the window, lost in thought. Gerald, a middle-aged man with graying hair, was known for his serious demeanor and penetrating gaze. He had dedicated much of his life to business and local politics, being one of the pillars of the community in which he lived. Kerry, his wife, was an elegant woman with delicate features and an air of melancholy that seemed to follow her wherever she went. Together, they formed a respected and admired couple, but they also harbored secrets that few knew. As the flight progressed, the aircraft flew over the vast forests and mountains of Phelps County, Missouri. Below, the landscape was one of serene and wild beauty, with winding rivers cutting through dense forests and rolling hills stretching as far as the eye could see. But for Gerald and Kerry, the scenery below seemed unimportant. Gerald, sitting by the window, suddenly stood up, muttering something to his wife about going to the restroom. Kerry, with an almost automatic gesture, let him pass, not realizing that this simple movement would mark the beginning of a mystery that would never be solved. Gerald walked down the narrow aisle of the plane, moving with the ease of someone who did this every day. Other passengers barely noticed his presence as he made his way to the rear of the aircraft. He entered the small bathroom and locked the door behind him, disappearing from everyone's sight. Minutes passed. Kerry, after waiting what seemed like longer than it should have been, began to grow anxious. She looked down the aisle, expecting to see her husband return, but the seat beside her remained empty. Deciding to check, Kerry stood up and walked toward the bathroom, her heart pounding faster with each step. When she reached the door, she hesitated for a moment before knocking gently. There was no answer. Kerry called again, but the silence that followed was deafening. Panic rising within her, she tried to open the door but found it locked. It was then that a sense of dread began to form in her chest. Something was terribly wrong. She called one of the flight attendants, Eloise Smith, a young and dedicated woman who quickly came to the scene. Eloise, after unsuccessfully trying to open the door, decided to inform Captain Miguel Cabica of the situation. The experienced and calm pilot decided not to take any risks and ordered the aircraft to make an emergency landing at the nearest airport in Springfield, Missouri. The passengers, not quite sure what was happening, remained calm, although some were beginning to exchange worried glances. Upon landing, the crew opened the bathroom door, but to everyone's astonishment, it was empty. There was no sign of Gerald Potter. The crew conducted a thorough search of the entire aircraft, checking even the cargo hold and maintenance areas, but Gerald was nowhere to be found. The mystery deepened, and the questions piled up. How could a man disappear from a plane mid-flight? Was there a rational explanation for this event? The police were immediately called, and the authorities conducted an exhaustive investigation, but all leads led to the same dead end. The passenger list confirmed that Gerald Potter had boarded, and his luggage was in the cargo hold, but he was no longer on board. Kerry, in shock, was taken to a waiting room while the authorities tried to make sense of what had happened. She kept repeating, almost like a mantra, that her husband had entered the bathroom and simply vanished. But aside from her testimony, there was no evidence to support her story. Gerald Potter's disappearance soon made headlines, attracting the attention of the media and the public. Theories began to emerge, ranging from scientific explanations to the most absurd. Some suggested that Gerald might have escaped through a secret hatch, while others believed he had fallen victim to a military experiment or even an alien abduction. But all these speculations seemed fanciful, and in the end, no concrete proof was found. Gerald's disappearance was officially recorded as an unexplained disappearance, and the case was filed away, with no one knowing what had really happened. Kerry Potter, devastated and without answers, returned to Illinois, where she lived out the rest of her days in seclusion, far from the curious eyes and speculations that surrounded her. 6 years had passed since Gerald Potter's disappearance, and the world had largely forgotten the incident until something even stranger happened. In 1974, at Milan Airport, Italy, a Lufthansa flight was preparing to take off for Frankfurt, Germany. Among the passengers was Eleanor Thomas, a woman who, coincidentally, had been on the same flight where Gerald Potter disappeared. Eleanor, a retired teacher, was in Milan visiting relatives and was now returning home to Germany. She settled into her seat and began to flip through a magazine, trying to ignore the anxiety she always felt during flights. But something that day was about to bring back old memories she preferred to keep buried. Just before takeoff, Eleanor noticed a couple entering the cabin and occupying seats a few rows ahead of her. Something about them seemed strangely familiar. It was as if she had seen them before, but where? She discreetly observed them as they settled in. The man had an upright posture and penetrating eyes, while the woman seemed more withdrawn, with a melancholic air. Then, a chill ran down Eleanor's spine. She knew these people, but how could that be possible? Trying to shake off the feeling of déjà vu, Eleanor continued to observe the couple. They spoke in low voices, exchanging knowing glances that suggested a long and intimate relationship. Suddenly, the man stood up, and the woman followed shortly after. Eleanor felt her heart race. It was as if she was reliving what had happened 6 years earlier. With a mix of fear and fascination, she watched them walk toward the back of the plane. Once again, the couple disappeared. Eleanor waited anxiously for them to return to their seats, but time passed, and nothing happened. Feeling compelled to act, she got up and went to the back of the plane, but found the bathroom door locked. She called an attendant, who immediately tried to open the door, but, just like before, there was no one inside. Terrified, Eleanor told the crew what had happened, but no one believed her. To the attendants and pilots, it was impossible for someone to simply vanish from a plane mid-flight. Even so, upon arriving in Frankfurt, the authorities were notified, but once again, no trace was found. It was as if the couple had never existed, except for the empty seats and their names on the passenger list. The disappearance of the Potters became a legend among mystery and conspiracy enthusiasts. Many speculated that they had fallen victim to some kind of time or space distortion, while others believed they were involved in something more sinister. However, no one was able to provide a satisfactory explanation, and the case remained an enigma. But the mystery didn't end there. In 1988, 20 years after the first disappearance, a small private jet took off from Maryland Airport, United States, bound for New York. On board was a couple who had booked the flight under the names of Gerald and Kerry Potter. The crew, consisting of 2 pilots and 2 attendants, noticed that the passengers seemed tired but in good spirits, chatting casually at the beginning of the flight. However, something strange happened during the trip. Shortly before landing in New York, Gerald stood up from his seat, followed by Kerry, and walked toward the back of the plane. The attendants, who were watching them, noticed something disturbing. The couple simply vanished before their eyes, as if they had dissolved into thin air. In shock, one of the attendants ran to inform the pilots, who immediately contacted the control tower, reporting the incident. When the jet landed, authorities were once again called, and once again, there was no sign of the Potters. The ensuing investigation was inconclusive, as all the others had been. No rational explanation could be found, and the mystery of the Potters continued to haunt all those who learned of it. What really happened to Gerald and Kerry Potter? Were they victims of some phenomenon beyond human comprehension, trapped in some sort of temporal limbo? Or was it all the result of hallucinations and bizarre coincidences? To this day, no one knows for sure. The case remains one of the greatest unsolved enigmas in aviation history, a mystery that defies logic and reality. And what about you, dear reader? What do you think of this story? Is there a rational explanation for the Potter's disappearance? Or are we facing a phenomenon that transcends our understanding? Share your theories and reflections in the comments and share this mystery with others who, like you, are intrigued by the inexplicable.